In New England, the loss of the top predator is often unnoticed, yet its absence requires intensive resource management. Another major challenge is the loss of habitat. As we continue to modify our landscape, we see the impact both in land-based and aquatic food webs.
An aquatic food web, if you start from literally the bottom up, starts with bacteria. It is fueled from above by sunlight, like any food web is, and that feeds usually suspended algae. Those algae are fed on by microorganisms, but they're then the base of the food web for the higher levels. And the higher levels in the open waters, in the water itself, tend to be things like planktivorous fish, fish that will eat those individual small microscopic animals. And those small fish are things like smelt, larval fishes or juvenile fishes of every species that then will eventually sometimes become predators of the planktivorous fishes. And those predators are the ones that we tend to find most interesting, things like lake trout and rainbow trout and walleye and basses. We've been stocking lake trout for 30 years now. In the Great Lakes, they've been stocking for almost 50 years. All of the Atlantic salmon, all of the lake trout in the lake are the direct product of putting them back in the lake from hatcheries, because those two species are locally extinct. They got wiped out. Hatchery fish are returned to the lake, they're stocked, and they become part of the ecosystem. They're predators, they're out there, but they're not reproducing on their own. And that puts us in a very awkward position of spending a huge amount of time and money sustaining a food web that should be self-sustaining. The habitat loss that's sort of most in the face and easily seen is the loss of access to upstream habitat. You build a dam, you completely block their access to a place where they can reproduce and sustain their population.
If we're interested in studying the problem of how changes in habitat area affect the food web, what we'll do is we'll randomly assign 10 plants in this group to be controls. They will not be manipulated in any way, but we will follow the populations that are in them. Another 10 plants will have the treatment, and the treatment might be removing half of the water from that leaf. So that is the equivalent of contracting the habitat area that's available. We will again monitor the plants in an identical way and monitor the animal populations that are in there. And the comparison of the food webs in those two groups will tell us what the effect of that habitat contraction is going to be.
As we continue to learn about this scientific research, we certainly see how it has impact on our lives. Vermont is literally defined not only by the aquatic system that is Lake Champlain, but by its farming culture and land use activity.
The first part of a lake proper that's affected by human activity is the nearshore area. If you did a flight over the lake or even standing on the shoreline, you'll see plumes from every river mouth where sediments are entering the lake. Now, to some extent, that's a normal effect. There should be nutrients entering the lake from those streams. They feed the nutrient base in the lake. What the problem arises is when we overdo it, when we don't control our effect on the landscape enough, so there's too much sediment, there's too much nutrient entering the lake, and that starts to change the whole lake system. We've got huge needs for ecosystem resources. Farmers have needs of land, they have needs of sunlight, they have needs to produce things for human beings simply to exist. And like it or not, those impacts will have impacts on the immediate land that they use and ultimately downstream. So we need farmers. They're obviously the base of our food chain in most respects. What we need to do is understand how best to help them do what they need to do effectively without too much burden, and at the same time make it compatible with the other part of the ecosystem, which is the aquatic one.
Vermont is indeed at the forefront of the local food movement and sustainable agriculture. Farmers are realizing their role as land stewards and demonstrating how ecological farming can strengthen the local food web, enhance the environment, and be profitable, all at the same time.
A diverse farm, and economically, if something doesn't work out right, other aspects of the farm will hopefully make up on the financial side. From a biological perspective, if we have animals and plants working together, often the animals can be a consumer eating the grass and the forage on the hillsides. Their waste material I can then apply to the fields that I'm going to grow on that next season. And that breaks down the sun's energy that was put into the plants and turns it into energy that the plants can use from their roots. So it's really a whole system that we're trying to put together.
Yeah, I've heard you use the word polyculture to describe that diversity of thinking. Can you contrast that with, in terms of production, from, say, a monoculture system where you have a single crop growing on a farm?
When you have a single crop on a farm, there are a tremendous number of inputs you need to put in, and then year in and year out, that same crop is taking the exact same nutrients out of the soil. And you actually get very imbalanced soil situations that are not healthy for the plants, nor healthy for the other microorganisms in the soil. If you grow lots of plants and then you even add animals into the mix, you're just simply adding more variety, and it's a much healthier balance.
There's a whole nother kind of food web out in nature, and that's what ecologists are now calling the brown food web. As things die, as their carcasses left in the woods, left on the plains, something starts eating them. You get the bacteria, you get the decomposers, you get the beetles, you get the flies, and then the birds eat the flies, and you work your way up. And in fact, ecologists now know that probably 3/4 of the energy that moves through ecosystems actually moves through the brown food web as opposed to the green food web.
The soil really is the key aspect. Fundamentally, in organic farming, our farm is an organic farm, really so much of the basis is soil health.
Dave, you're also a legislator in the House of Representatives here in the state, and I would imagine that food security is an issue for people in the state and citizens of the state. What do you have to say about food security and this type of farming supporting the food security in the state, and whether that's really important?
We are a tremendous agricultural state, but we actually are the most single commodity dependent state in the country, meaning, dairy is 70 to 75% of our agricultural output. I don't think that's healthy for our economy, nor for our soils and our food systems. My farm and many other folks who are similar to me that are growing from 2 acres or 3 acres to now 20 and 30 acres are attempting to really shift that dynamic, again, both economically and ecologically, and, as you mentioned, from the food security standpoint. Our farm used to produce 8 or 10 acres of vegetables. This year we did 14. Next year we'll do 20. We'll have no problem selling all of that. For us to add meat or add fruit or other winter storage crops into the mix is really just sort of a natural progression for us in feeding the local economy and local consumers. But we are still a long way from where we need to be as a state. There could be 50 farms my size, and we still would have a ways to go to feeding the state with our own product.
I can hear you be pretty confident about a society that is dependent and wanting more local foods and eating quite regionally. Tell me about your optimism. Is this a trend that's here to stay?
I do think there's a sort of a grand awakening of consciousness around where is our food coming from? What does that mean for our economy? What does that mean for the health and nutritional value of my food? And what is my sense of community? And while it may not reach every single person, everyone's got different values, there has been a greatly expanded number of people and percentage of our society that's aware of that sort of way of thinking.
The principles are always the same. I think one of the things that we always try to communicate to our students, our friends, our colleagues, our parents, whenever we're talking to them, is that ecology is about, among other things, is about moving energy through systems. So you're basically talking about energy and nutrients coming from one place, being transformed by organismal actions to another place.
It's been wonderful to see how people are starting to understand ecological systems, and they realize that you have to have top predators for a healthy system.
Modeling aquatic ecosystems is incredibly challenging. The system is not only so complex, but it's so large. To really understand a food web, you want to reduce it to something that's more tangible, that you can really look at all of the pieces.
There are very, very few examples of places where you can actually do an experiment on how changing a habitat and changing the nutrient input, the food input, to a complete food web can actually be done experimentally.
And the beauty of this system is we can directly carry out those manipulations. We can go into the web that's in one of these pitchers and physically remove all the top predators from it, leaving the lower part of the food web intact. We can also alter the volume of the habitat, the area that's available for the organisms, simply by adding or removing water. That's the habitat that they are in, so we can change that directly. So this is a great system for carrying out these kinds of experimental manipulations on an entire food web.
The kinds of changes that we observe in our environment are not things that are just happening today, that just happened yesterday. Those kinds of changes that we see in the climate record that humans began really doing to the environment in the 1940s now are really affecting our ecosystems. The common jargon that we see now in the popular press is people talk about tipping points, right? Is this a tipping point? Are all carnivorous plants going to stop making traps? And are pitcher plants all going to have more simplified food webs? We don't know the answer to that question, but we know that what set up that tipping point is something that we did 60 years ago. The take-home lesson from that is that maybe it's better to not do something until you're sure that it won't have any effect, as opposed to just keeping on doing business as usual until someone points out that it's already too late.
It's exciting to see this innovative research with such profound, far-reaching significance right here in New England. The National Science Foundation's EPSCoR program and the scientists they support are actively involved in critical research that affects us all, and it's a pleasure bringing it to you. I'm Amy Seidel. Join me next time for more emerging science.